for the introduction, Professor Park. And good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to the organizers for having me here today. I'm honored to share this stage with my esteemed fellow panelists, and I hope you'll be able to take something useful away from my presentation today. I currently wear a few different hats as part of my daily work. As Professor Park has mentioned, I'm a research fellow at the National University of Singapore, where I focus on social enterprises, specifically on the recurring patterns that social enterprise founders or social entrepreneurs use to create their organizations. Separately, I serve as Chief Operating Officer at the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, and I also co-founded a youth leadership organization called the Southeast Asian Leadership Network 9 years ago in California. And I continue to engage with that organization on a voluntary basis. For today, I'd like to cover 3 topics, given the allocated time. And what I'll do is I'll quickly introduce the social needs in Singapore and talk about the evolving social enterprise scene that has responded to these needs. I'll then discuss some current social enterprise trends and phenomena that we see in Singapore. And I'll end the presentation by sharing what I see as future developments in the sector. Now, this is my second trip to South Korea. And while I'm sharing my perspectives on what is happening in Singapore, I'm looking to learn as much from all of you as possible. As part of my presentations, I'll actually be asking you some questions. So don't be surprised. I hope you'll be spontaneous and sort of give me some feedback along the way. Okay, there'll be very basic survey type questions. Okay, I see some smiles, so good. Okay, so let me start off with the first question. How many of you here in the audience have been to Singapore? Can you put up your hand? Okay, good. We've got a good number of people that are familiar with Singapore. Many of you will probably know, whether you've been to Singapore or not, that we're not a big country, and it's about the size of Seoul in terms of physical coverage, but about half the population. When you fly into Singapore, you will arrive on the easternmost side of the country, and you travel for 20 minutes, you'll hit the central downtown area, and you travel another 20 minutes towards the west, and you'll be in the next country, Malaysia. Okay, so that's how big Singapore is. We have about 3.8 million residents in Singapore, with slightly more than 1 million foreigners. And I thought I would put up a slide to show you sort of the numbers as it relates to the work-capable, disadvantaged populations in Singapore. If you add it all up, we're looking at about 0.3% of the resident population. And putting this in context of social enterprise, if you're looking to create a job creation type, or what we call a work integration social enterprise, this is sort of your target workforce, okay, which is quite a limited pool. And if you want to create a specific social enterprise to benefit any of these sort of vulnerable groups, it becomes even more challenging, right? Because now your numbers are down in the 1,000 and low thousands range. In South Korea, you have social enterprises that create jobs for vulnerable groups. They provide social service, and they contribute to community improvement. You have hybrid combinations of these different functions as well. In Singapore, the social enterprise movement is promoted by the ministry that looks at social and family development. So this is the ministry that caters to the social safety net of Singapore. And hence, the perception of social enterprise becomes very much along the lines of creating jobs for vulnerable populations. Okay? There are, of course, other social enterprises that do and look into other areas, like the environment, like community building, but those tend to sort of sit in the periphery. Professor Kim and Mr. Vasani this morning talked about cooperatives. So the cooperative movement started in Singapore more than 50 years ago, and For many Singaporeans, we see them as grocery stores, insurance companies, very much a part of regular commercial life, economic life in Singapore. But for some reason, the connection between social enterprise and cooperatives is not as strong. Okay? Cooperatives sort of live as a separate entity. Also, we do not have a certification for social enterprises in Singapore, and there are ongoing discussions around whether we want to pursue that. Here are some examples of social enterprises that have responded to the different needs, and I want to highlight this one called Bliss Cafe. This social enterprise had a very interesting beginning because its founder, Miss Christine Low, started a business as a commercial entity at the beginning. And through personal reasons, she started hiring disadvantaged people into her workforce. She was touched by the situations of these people and continued hiring more of them over time. At one point where it became almost 75% of her workforce were beneficiaries. Okay? So without intending to, she actually moved from a business which slowly included more corporate social responsibility and ended up becoming a social enterprise. Right? I mean, if you have 75 people, 75% of your workforce as beneficiaries, I think many of you practitioners know that would be a very close definition of a social enterprise. She has since settled on a beneficiary mix of 40% because oftentimes you need a combination of regular, fully functioning staff with beneficiaries to make your overall operation effective. I asked Christine, the founder, some time back about her partnership with the social organizations, with NGOs in Singapore that do social service delivery. And she actually said that she does not have many partnerships. She learned along the way as the businesswoman how to respond to the social needs of all these beneficiaries and created what she called a buddy system by pairing up regular staff with beneficiary staff. And in doing so, develop a mentorship and support framework between the vulnerable and the able-bodied within her own company. Yeah? So her social enterprise not only creates jobs for vulnerable people, but has also provided the opportunity for the able-bodied to develop empathy with organizations or with communities of social need. And I think that is a very powerful model because then you go into the broader benefits of community bonding and community impact. I want to share with you a brief history of the social enterprise landscape in Singapore. It actually starts here in 2003 with a ministry called the MCYS, which stands for Ministry of Community, Youth and Sports. I included this other organization here in 2001 because that is the organization that supports the creation of small and medium-sized enterprises in Singapore. So before social entrepreneurs actually knew about social enterprises and social entrepreneurship, when they wanted to create businesses to benefit vulnerable groups, they would go to Spring to get their funding support to start basically regular business. And then in 2003, there was more of a consolidated campaign to talk about social enterprise and to make the availability of funding specifically for social enterprise available. So back in 2003, the definition for social enterprise was quite open, and there were different organizations that represented environmental causes, community building, as well as job creation for vulnerable communities that came forward to apply for the grant. And I think in part because of the range of different types of organizations coming to apply, it became tricky for the ministry to assess the impact of all these different interest areas. And that's why in 2005, the focus actually narrowed to look at specifically the vulnerable groups in Singapore. And this is by way of a program called ComCare that you can see there. I actually sit on the ComCare committee right now, and we do approve grants of up to 250,000 US dollars equivalent for up to 3 years of funding for anyone who wants to start a social enterprise that can create jobs for vulnerable groups. Another interesting development is in 2007, the EDB, which is the Economic Development Board of Singapore, looked into bringing in international organizations into Singapore. And as part of that movement, we have brought in regional as well as international organizations that support the development of social enterprises. Further on from 2010, there were a few what we would consider as social enterprise incubators that were formed to provide mentorship and ongoing support and capacity building for these organizations. Interestingly, just 2 years ago, the President of Singapore developed an interest in social enterprise and created a national level competition to recognize social enterprises. So this has generated more awareness within the minds of the Singaporean public. Here are just some numbers in terms of organizations funded by government agencies, as well as number of members that belong to these different associations as well as incubators. Okay, in terms of some trends and phenomena in Singapore, I'll be covering these three in sequence. And let me start off with the first one. The first trend that we see is overall engagement in the social enterprise sector increasing. And this is probably happening to a large extent in many parts of Asia as well. In the youth level, we look at high school students as well as university level students. And as an indication of their engagement, we see these three universities, which are the main ones in Singapore, offering social entrepreneurship or social enterprise modules to their students. All of them run business plan competitions, and invariably there will be a social category within those business plan competitions. It's interesting that Nanyang Technological University, which runs a national level competition last year, if you look at their top 50 finalists, they were all organizations with a primary social objective. Okay, so this is taking on a lot of interest from the young people. There are also various programs run by organizations like Singapore International Foundation, the Rotary Club, this is the Rotary Club, and National Youth Council that look to build capacity of youth-led social enterprises. Okay, so back to my questions for all of you again. Let me just quickly ask, how many of you in the audience have young children? Okay, some over there, okay. Okay, good distribution. I've got 2 kids as well. My 2 boys are 5 years and 2.5 years old. Okay, so those of you with kids and those of you who have future kids, imagine if one day your child comes to you and says, Mommy or Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a social entrepreneur. How will you react, right? You've got 2 options. A, you say, great, go for it. You know, that's the best thing I ever heard. You know, this is what I really wish for you. Or B, you are stunned and you are either horrified or disappointed. Okay? Okay, those of you who would respond with A, please put up your hands. Okay? And for B, please put up your hands. Yeah? No, is there a C? Any other alternatives? Okay, either some of you are being shy about your real response, or maybe you don't want to let the people know how you really feel. But I personally would be quite stunned and quite horrified. Yeah? For the social entrepreneurs in the audience, we are all very passionate about what we do. But at the same time, you understand the risk and challenges. And when you think about how that translates to your own family in terms of their future careers, this is where some personal conflicts might come up. Yeah, and you will know that the social enterprise sector doesn't really have much of a career path. I mean, unless we start going into cooperatives, then it's more structured. But the entrepreneurial side is very real, very risky, and very unpredictable. Okay? In Singapore, whenever I ask this question, it's mostly around parents reacting with disappointment and with horror, usually. This is, part of what is required to change mindsets. And it takes time. And what is encouraging is this level here, which is the mid-career professionals. Okay? There are increasingly more mid-career professionals that we see in Singapore deciding to switch from the private sector into the social enterprise sector. And I see them because I sit in this fund here that provides grants to support them to launch their own social enterprise. And there are also other programs that are available to help them get along. If you are a private sector professional, you are very familiar with business processes, and then your challenge is understanding the social sector more so that you can be effective on both sides. Yeah? So for parents that might be horrified about their kids wanting to grow up to become social entrepreneurs, maybe you can tell them, yes, it's a great idea. Maybe you get some private sector experience first for a short while. And when you have those skills and when you're ready, go launch your social enterprise because you'll be so much better prepared to be successful. Yeah? And I found that works pretty well with the parents that I talked to. Okay, the other thing that's happening in Singapore is that it's a very small country, but we have many intermediaries that support this development. There are those that focus on the local needs and the local market. And then there's this constellation, this whole group of regional intermediaries, yeah, like Ashoka, like Endeavour, AVPN that I'm involved in as well, the Impact Investment Exchange that are there to facilitate funding as well as capacity building to social enterprises, either locally, and for them it's actually more interesting regionally. That's why they are based in Singapore. And this is in part because of the efforts from the Economic Development Board. So as the field of social enterprise, venture philanthropy, and impact investing grows, there are increasingly more of these intermediaries looking to establish an operation in Singapore as a bridge to the region. And this has brought benefits to our local practitioners in terms of new ideas and best practices, and also sharing among the community. Okay, this is one of my favorite slides, which is in Singapore, we have this issue of many different funding programs chasing comparatively fewer deals. So another question for the audience. And this is a question that is related to South Korea. How many people in the audience feel that you have access to many funds that will support social enterprises in Korea? If you agree that there are many funds available, put up your hand. Okay, a few. Not that many, yeah? Not that many. Okay. If there were more funds available from the government, specifically the government, and you wanted to start a social enterprise, would you apply for those funds? Put up your hand. Okay, good. More people. Okay, very interesting. Thank you. In Singapore, we actually have the opposite problem. Okay, we have many funds available, but not many people wanting to apply. Okay. So what's happening in Singapore is we have a variety of government programs funded by different ministries. Okay, this one is the Ministry for Social Development. This is the Trade and Industry. This ministry looks at culture and youth, and this is the Ministry of Finance. They all have different sort of objectives or agenda. And interestingly, social enterprise or the operation of social enterprise somehow intersects with all these different agenda. So if you're looking to start a social enterprise in Singapore, you actually have access to different programs that you can tap into by positioning a slightly different value proposition or social value proposition to the different ministries. Okay, so that's the sort of a situation in Singapore. Okay, so that's a summary of the trends that we see. And with these trends, where do I see the development going over the next few years? There's sort of three possibilities, and they could all, I mean, they're not mutually exclusive, they could all take place. The first one is corporate social responsibility and social enterprise converging, coming together. I think that growing interest by the youth and mid-career professionals speak to a growing awareness of a new way of doing business. On one hand, this will motivate people to start social enterprises, and on the other hand, it will also encourage commercial entrepreneurs to adopt social elements into their operations. And hence, the two realms of corporate social responsibility and social enterprise will start meeting in the middle. And over time, I hope it'll be hard to tell the difference between the two. The second trend is around what we call frugal innovations. So I haven't really discussed frugal innovations much as part of my presentation, but frugal innovation is the process of reducing complexity and the cost of goods in order to sell them to developing countries and developing markets. This concept is related to bottom of the pyramid, as well as designing for extreme affordability. The challenge in frugal innovation so far has been to develop effective models to channel first world technology and practices to meet the needs of emerging market opportunities. With the growth of the international organizations sector in Singapore and the local university programs that actively connect with the region, I'm seeing some early experiments where this can actually take off and bear fruit in the near term. Okay, there's an effective process of evolving something effective to connect the two. Last but not least, I see social innovations being spearheaded by the next generation. And this last point is probably quite obvious, but worth stating. And maybe it has more relevance to the Singapore context. The future has always been in the hands of our next generation, and how we equip them with skills and values will determine the course of their work and their environments. I think we have reached an exciting inflection point in Singapore, not only for the social enterprise sector, but also in how our young have evolved and developed their worldview and their purpose in life. This is actually quite different from when I was growing up in Singapore, where we focus on developing skills to become managers in multinational corporations. I'm confident that I'll be amazed by what my children's generation will create in terms of the next generation of social innovations. Okay, so thank you for listening to my presentation and also for participating in my quick surveys. We are far from having all the answers, but there is a lot happening in Singapore, and I want to invite you to come and visit and to share and learn with us. Thank you.
태호 연구위원님의 훌륭한 발표 감사드립니다. 태호 위원님께 질문하실 분 계신가요? 시간 관계상 거기 계신가요? 네.
저 강원도 영월에서 온 반병선인데요. 선생님이 생각하실 때는 싱가포르가 지원이 많다고 생각하시는데 우리나라를 어떻게 평가하시는지 궁금합니다.
I have to say I'm not familiar with the funding programs over here. But based on the quick feedback I got just now from the survey, I'm assuming that it's either not that many funds available or probably quite difficult to get funds.
네, 추가 질문은 죄송하지만 시간 관계상 4부에서 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 태호 선생님, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Yeah.